On that note, I'm going to pass over to Amy. Amy is our head of archives. I'm really looking forward to this because it's going to be image heavy. You love the presentation. We know that's going to be great pictures and not a lot of words, like so many you see. So thank you very much for joining us, Amy, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Birdie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Amy. I'm the head of archives and brand heritage at Herman Miller, which is a very fun job. And I'm going to talk a little bit this morning. I'm calling from Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's morning here. So I'm going to talk about how we use the archives at Herman Miller, some projects that we've worked on, and yeah, feel free to ask questions. Hopefully we don't have any repeat customers because you might see some stuff you've seen before, but yeah, I'm excited. So the archives at Herman Miller are literally a warehouse space full of records that have been collected since the beginning of the company over 100 years ago. So the type of stuff in the boxes that you see here are things like market launch plans for the Aeron chair, also design drawings for said chair, records kept by past executives like the founder of the company, DJ Dupree, correspondence from the Eames, photography. I'm going to be showing some images of the type of content that has been kept over the years, but just to give you guys a sense of literally it's a giant warehouse space full of bankers boxes. So I said we had correspondence. This is one of my favorite letters that I've come across in the correspondence of our founder, DJ Dupree. This is a letter from George Nelson, who was Herman Miller's first sort of design director. I like to say that he was a brand marketer before that was even really considered a thing. He was an editor, trained as a magazine editor and as an architect. But it was because of George Nelson that Herman Miller sort of formed this group after Gilbert Rohde's time, our first modern designer. But Nelson was the one responsible for getting Herman Miller to bring on the now infamous Eames molded plywood furniture. And so Nelson at the time was designing things like I like to call them the meat and potatoes type furniture. So case goods, soft seating. And Nelson was aware of the work that Charles and Ray Eames were doing just from being involved in the industrial design community at that time. And the Eameses, they had a one-man furniture show at MoMA in New York, which is actually where DJ first saw this furniture. But Nelson encouraged DJ to acquire this furniture line or at least distribute it, which then obviously changed the course of our business in terms of turning us into a seating business, performance seating now. But as you can see here, Nelson's sort of letting DJ know that the other competition for the Eames furniture has washed out and now they're deciding on Herman Miller. So this is a really critical part in our history, and I love that a piece of that correspondence was saved. And along with stuff like that letter, we've saved stuff like furniture patents. So Herman Miller has filed many, many patents all over the world over the years. This was one for the Eames molded plywood furniture, but I got to accession a patent last week for the Cosm chair. So these very visual and also helpful from a legal standpoint pieces are things that, you know, again, I help or interface with our legal department as we're pursuing trade dress for these designs, but then also this is such a cool image and it's just as easy to share it on Herman Miller's Instagram. And it's cool to see these documents. One of my favorite collections that we have in the archives is our product development collection. And this was started by a guy named Pep Nagelkirk, who is the head of Herman Miller's model shop. And so Pep was sort of the internal person at Herman Miller that was helping these design firms get stuff made in mass. And so George Nelson designed the coconut chair, which is sort of an iconic piece of furniture now. But at one point, management at Herman Miller wanted to explore if we might kind of adjust this and turn it into a true lounge chair by adding a high back to it. So the high-backed coconut chair was sort of prototyped, There was some correspondence back and forth between the Nelson office and Herman Miller, but they ultimately decided not to make the chair. And here are some reasons why. The chair is ugly and the chair is uncomfortable. So simple enough. But I love that this was kept because obviously the correspondence and its tone is very funny, but so much of this part of the design process is now done through email, Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx meetings, Slack, text messages. And so these sort of memos are very succinct reasons why we didn't go into this. I'm glad we're kept because it's a great document. But now if I have a creative director from our product team come to me and say, have we ever thought about a high-backed coconut chair? I can say, yes, and we didn't do it, and we shouldn't try it now. Herman Miller also has a pretty extensive film collection. So Charles and Ray Eames made over 100 films during their career, and many of the early experimentations in film were actually for the products that they were designing for Herman Miller. So they weren't done once it hit the manufacturing floor. They were also thinking of ways to market the furniture as well. And that's sort of always been a Herman Miller point of view. We have a lot of people working for us who are trained as architects or designers themselves, and those are usually the people who can best contextualize and talk about the furniture and its meaning. So the Eameses themselves were even thinking about marketing, how to explain to people the design process, the manufacturing process, and they were translating this into film. We also have a huge photography collection. So imagine all of the assets that are created in the life cycle of a product. So white sweeps, images of product in showrooms or in use. Some of my favorite images or photography has actually been done by Charles and Ray Eames themselves. And so this is an image of Alexander Girard and his wife and business partner, Susan, at the opening of Herman Miller's San Francisco, California showroom that Girard designed. So he's responsible for this amazing storage wall that you see, all of these objects. And this photo was taken by Charles and Ray Eames at the opening party. So I just also love to imagine them in 1957 hanging out in this San Francisco showroom. But the Eames photography collection is also a great sort of look at the beginning of art direction, so to say. So Ray Eames was a stylist and an art director, I think really before that was considered a true profession. And so I love this image where these chairs could have been very simply placed around a table, kind of boring, but instead this image has movement, the colors are interesting, and Ray is even slid in some of her noted floral arrangements that she was kind of famous for doing. So I love, again, this approach to product photography and making it into high art. This was another image that was composed by the Eameses for the molded plywood furniture that I spoke about earlier. But, obviously, once you kind of adjust your eyes and understand that this is, in fact, a room full of furniture, the Eameses have instead treated it as like a piece of high art. It's assemblage. Even the camera angle is giving you this sort of warped view of what it is you're actually seeing. The Eameses elevated product photography to that of fine art. George Nelson hired a guy named Ezra Stoller, who was one of the more famous architectural photographers working at the time, to photograph his initial collection for Herman Miller in the late 40s. And Stoller, being an architectural photographer, took that kind of point of view of photographing buildings and applied that to furniture. So you look at this image of Osamu Noguchi's coffee table, and you maybe initially don't understand that it's a coffee table. It looks like something from outer space, to be quite honest. But again, I love Stoller sort of elevating product photography to that of fine art, which now gives us these iconic images. One of my favorite collections that we have in our photography kind of pile is from a guy named Jim Eppinger, who was Herman Miller's first East Coast sales representative. And so he was also the liaison between the designers and West Michigan. So this is Alexander Girard at his home in Santa Fe.
Fantastic. Okay, Andy. Well, are you off at the?
Awesome. The realities of COVID times and online meetings. So Jim was the one responsible for kind of liaising between these designers and Herman Miller. I love these photos because rarely were these designers ever all in the same place. The Eameses were based in California. Alexander Girard was in Santa Fe, so a little bit closer to them, but George Nelson was in New York City. So while these people corresponded very often, it was very rare that they were all in one place. And this is them likely at some sort of sales meeting here in Michigan. And then I love this photo of Charles and Ray Eames hanging out at their house in Pacific Palisades, California. That's now an famous architectural marvel. If you ever find yourself in Southern California, I highly suggest that you go visit. But here is a view, if you ever get the chance to come to Michigan, this is the vault that we have at Herman Miller. So this is a bit more temperature and humidity controlled space that we store things like photography negatives, some earlier pieces of furniture, but it's one of the coolest corners of our distribution building. Here's another view you guys will see, but we have these rolling stacks that we can keep everything in and fit as much stuff as possible. And then we've kept earlier pieces of furniture in the vault, and I like showing this, especially for industrial designers, design students. You have the middle chair and the chair on the right, with these Eiffel bases that were designed by Charles and Ray Eames, and you can kind of see their iterative design process in action with these two chair bases. So on the right, there's an earlier base where you have the flared feet that actually ended up failing when people were sitting in them. And so that was very quickly fixed by the Eameses. And then you see in the base on the left or in the middle here that the feet have sort of been propped upright and more structurally sound. But I love sort of seeing the Eames' design process so literally right there. And I get asked in my job a lot, how do I tell how old my chair is? And usually it's just, or it can be as simple as flipping it over. So this was a product marking for the molded plywood furniture when Herman Miller was distributing it for Evans Products Company. So Evans was the company based out of Washington State that the Eameses worked with to produce the molded plywood splints during World War II. Then they moved into furniture post-war. But this product marking tells me that this chair comes somewhere between 1947 and 1949, before Herman Miller fully acquired the business from Evans Products Company. So here's another view of the vault. I talked about that rolling storage. It's there on the right. And then we have flat files full of things like textile samples. So I mentioned Alexander Girard earlier. He was the head of Herman Miller's textile division, designed over 300 textiles in a multitude of colorways that now we use for exhibition. But then also Maharam is a textile company that's part of the Herman Miller family that is now the producer of Alexander Girard textile designs. We also have drawings that we've kept from our model shop over the years. So the drawing on the right is the exploded view of the Eames lounge and ottoman, every single little screw, foot, etc. These drawings not only are super cool to look at when people come to visit, but they can also be helpful for our product team and manufacturing as we continue to manufacture these designs. We can sort of check in and make sure that everything is just so. So it's really easy for me to talk about people like the Eameses and George Nelson, but there were a lot of people who were responsible for Herman Miller's storied design legacy, including this woman here on the left. She was a Japanese-American designer named Tomoko Miho that worked for George Nelson's office and was actually head of their graphic design department. And if you're a graphic design history enthusiast, some of Herman Miller's printed matter for the time, including this 1964 catalog, is sort of very well known, at least by graphic design enthusiasts. But Tomoko was actually the one responsible for putting this project together. She was not only responsible for the layout, but she was also doing things like art directing photo shoots. So you see this image here, which is of Eames stacking and ganging seating. So this could very easily be a boring picture of chairs in a classroom. But instead, Tomoko has elevated it to fine art, to the sculptural view of these chairs. And I just love this image. She also did these this group of catalogs for Herman Miller in the late 60s. The sense of color is amazing. I just love this set, and it's been really fun digging into Tomoko's work and kind of further understanding her mark on Herman Miller history, and sort of adding more people to this design canon. So just for fun, we have a lot of advertisements that we've kept over the years. So these were done by Irving Harper, who also worked for George Nelson, and Irving actually designed the logo that we still use today, which is in fact an M. One of my favorite corners of the collection is our clippings file that somebody very intently cut out this advertisement out of a 1949 issue of the New Yorker when we were advertising Osamu Noguchi's coffee table. But I'm just glad that we have this record. Somebody kept it, and it's super cool to look back on. Here's some more ads by Irving Harper. He passed away a few years ago, but I had the pleasure of spending a little bit of time with him where he remarked that he loved doing advertisements for Herman Miller because he could make the furniture as small as he wanted on the page, which very clearly he's sort of doing here. You have these abstracted views of case goods, and Irving's doing these great graphic type treatments, and he really had kind of carte blanche to do whatever he wanted when it came to advertisements. This is one of my favorite ads that Irving did. This is kind of showing you the wood species and the pull options that were available on some case goods that Nelson had designed. So he's making it look like a mask, which is really funny because it could very simply be boring. Here are the pulls, here's the wood species, but he's obviously had some fun with it. Another advertisement for textiles where Irving's sort of playing with ripped paper. Alexander Girard got in on the fun as well. He was a master typographer and actually came up with a few custom typefaces for some of his Herman Miller projects, including that San Francisco showroom advertised here that I showed you. This is also a sales ad that he did for Herman Miller's textile and object shop that was in New York City that sort of acted as a textile showroom, and then also a place, Girard traveled around the world and collected folk art from many different corners of the world. And Herman Miller at one point had a store where you could buy to style your own home with. So some very one-to-one examples of how the archive is used. A few years ago, Herman Miller was looking at our offer of beds, and we needed to expand that. And so we dug into the archives to see, were there any beds that were viable to bring back for a market today, and we landed on George Nelson's thin edge bed group and day bed. So we quite literally went into the archives, pulled the drawings, pulled Pep Nagelkirk's files like I showed you earlier, got the details, and were able to, in fact, bring these designs back. So the drawing on the left is from when we first introduced the thin edge bed in the mid-50s. Another one for the day bed. I love this very literal transition, but all to say that, these materials are not only just amazing to look at, but they're very useful and used often by our teams today. And then in my job, I'm lucky to kind of be there very nose to tail in the process. So not only am I there with product development at the beginning, looking to see what primary source we have to work on these things, but at the end too, when PR comes to me and asks, do we have any great archival imagery that we can share with press as we're launching these products? A huge project that I've worked on during my time at Herman Miller, and always have to plug this, is this monograph. It's a history of the company, 614 pages, over 2,000 images. But it was really a chance to dive into not only Herman Miller's own archive, but I had the pleasure of literally traveling the world. I went to the Vitra Design Museum, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Cooper Hewitt, all to say that Herman Miller's design legacy is kept in the foremost collections around the world. And we were able to draw from all of those places to get a very complete story of Herman Miller developing into the global powerhouse that we know it as today. So Herman Miller has actually been an international company since 1957, and which we get into in this book, actually kind of telling that genesis story. But as you can see here, a spread like this kind of talks about how we've deployed our logo in physical spaces over the years and how we've used it in advertisements. And I'm a huge graphic design fan myself, and so this book was also a chance to get all of these pieces of graphic design in one place to sort of show you the context. I mean, because in reality, these amazing little pamphlets that you see on the left, unless you were visiting a Herman Miller showroom when these were coming out in the mid-50s, or you've collected them from eBay, you don't really get a chance to see all this stuff all in one place. And then again, in the research process, I had the pleasure of getting to look through so many primary sources. And so this was also a chance to give designers their own voice. And so throughout all of these pages, they're very image heavy rather than text. But in the places where we did want to have more text, it's Alexander Girard's essay, Good Design versus Style, that he wrote himself for a publication called Furniture Forum that we've republished here for the first time, should you decide you want to do a little bit more than kind of look at pictures. And then the book also ties together, I like to say, as the head of archives, what the archives do for Herman Miller is connect our past and present to our future. And so these are some views of Herman Miller's flagship at 251 Park Avenue South in New York City. I was heavily involved in this project from a interior space layout standpoint, where I had our 3D designers looking to the archives for inspiration to how to merchandise and style the space. So the book is not only a look at the past, but also how our past informs our now and our future. I talked a little bit about the research process, but I actually wanted to show all of you what it's like to do research at the world's largest library, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. You do, in fact, need a library card. I was happier to be there than I look in this picture, but this is a reading room at the Library of Congress. And when Charles and Ray Eames passed away, Charles passed away in 79, Ray 10 years later in 1989. And after Ray passed away, she transported over 1 million items that had been kept and cataloged and archived by the Eames office over the years to the Library of Congress, which then got separated. The collection got divided into the manuscripts division and the prints and photographs, of which I spent 2 weeks going through. So the box on the left is for the manuscript division, and on the right, we went through tens of thousands of color slides to get as much color imagery as we could in the book. But for example, in the manuscripts division, you get material like this. So I just imagine somebody in the Eames office was kind of helping visualize how the new molded plastic chair, how you would actually install a base on it. So this probably, or at least a copy of it, got sent to West Michigan to kind of explain to people how to put it together. And then you also get elements of the creative process. So I talked earlier, Ray Eames was not only, consulting on the industrial design side, but also she was helping design invitations to events in Herman Miller's Los Angeles showroom. So she really was doing a little bit of everything. And I love that this sort of mock-up for this invitation got kept in her records over the years. The Eameses also kept press about themselves, which I love. And so you get this. Saul Steinberg was an illustrator for The New Yorker and went on to become famous in his own right, but he was also a friend of the Eameses. And very shortly after they were finished developing the molded plastic chair, they had Saul come over and do a few illustrations on some chairs that then were exhibited, some deeming them vulgar. So I just imagine the Eameses having a laugh over this, and I love that they kept it. And then a more surreal part of the research process was literally opening up a folder at the Library of Congress and happening upon these scraps of paper, which puzzled me at first. But then I started to think about the fact that Ray Eames collected decorative paper and was very obsessive about having these things around for inspiration and for reference. And what sort of occurred to me is that this was very likely a color study that Ray Eames would have been working on. You look at these colors all together and it just sings. Of course it does, because it's Ray. But all to say, I just love that there is literally a folder at the Library of Congress that is full of Ray Eames's scrap sheets of paper. And speaking of the woman herself, I told you guys that we did a lot of work in the slide collection. And so to give you a little sense of what that was like, this is a lot bigger than a little color slide, which was more about that size. But you get these moments. This is Ray Eames sitting outside of the house that they built in Pacific Palisades with her garden. But I just think this is a nice image to end on. But that's all I got for you guys this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions. I saw some coming in. So Bertie, I guess I'll end the show and you guys can look at my big dumb face.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. If you could stop sharing, it would be much appreciated. I've got a few questions here, so let me just go back to the top. I'll try and get to all of them. Okay, great. That was fantastic, by the way. I've been into that space myself once before, and it was an incredible experience, which probably should bring me to the first question I should ask. And someone asks whether it is possible to arrange a visit. Do we take clients in there? Don't we? Is there effect of COVID, post-COVID?
Please. Once the U.S. has our COVID under control, which hopefully happens sometime soon, we welcome visitors from around the world. And that's usually, I mean, I'm walking you guys through this space digitally this morning, but usually we get to actually have people in the archives, which is really fun. It's a great, we kind of do more of a Herman Miller history lesson, so to say. But yes, once COVID is done, please come visit. Please bring clients. I think it's such an amazing place for anyone who even has a slight interest in design to come see in real life. So come on down. Once figure out how to not make everybody sick here.
Fantastic. I've got another question here from Teresa. Let me just quickly find it. She says, what a responsibility to ensure that things like these survive time. And then she wants to know, what is the facility manager's biggest challenge for ensuring the optimal conditions for a space like this for archives?
Oh my gosh, Teresa, I love that question. And one that honestly haunts me because, I mean, we have HVAC, we have facilities, people, those folks are aware that we do in fact have these precious gems that sort of need to be considered a bit differently. But yeah, it's just working closely with those facilities folks and making sure, I mean, we keep the vault pretty, we watch it pretty closely in terms of temperature and humidity levels, but we do the best with what we have. I hope one day that we have a facility that might rival the Vitra Design Museum, who does a great job of telling those American design stories. So that's sort of what I'm lobbying for here, to one day we'll have sort of a museum-like facility to bring people through.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, the next one is, and I've got two people asking pretty much the same question, is there a database with digital access to, say, the films, the posters, the files, all the things that we have in archive?
Not yet, but that's actually during COVID times. This has been a great chance for me and my colleague, Alexa Hagan, who's another archivist who works with me. We're kind of doing our own digital transformation at this time, which means getting a lot of the digitized material that we have into our document asset management system. So I joke that we have a big dam project for COVID times. And then we're also migrating our metadata within our data. I mean, this is very boring or inside baseball, but we're doing a big metadata cleanup project as well, with the hopes that getting sort of all this foundational work done, that we do eventually have a public facing digital archive that people can access. So not yet, but coming soon, hopefully.
Fantastic. I've got she says, Sorry, I got the wrong question. Now, again, one from Natasha. She said, "How does this kind of information resonate with prospective clients? So, how do people feel when they come in and actually come into the space and see it?"
I mean, I know this morning I leaned pretty heavily on the Eames, Nelson, Gerard, but I mean, there's also the whole, I mean, we get into this in the book, but I mean, Herman Miller basically invented office landscaping. Herman Miller basically invented ergonomic office seating. So, an ergonomic office seating designed by Bill Stump, designed by Studio 7.5, that sort of design, thinking, iteration, that would not have happened without people like Charles and Ray Eames looking at ergonomics even early on with the molded plywood furniture. So I think that these stories sort of cement Herman Miller's place in history in terms of how long we've been thinking about all of these things. And we've also collaborated and had people like Robert Probst establish the Herman Miller Research Corporation and sort of establish that function within our business. So I think, it's not only sort of looking back and like, look at all these cool things that we've done, but I truly think that without that foundation, we don't get the amazing work that we've done today. Even, I try to make this connection internally, but, Herman Miller just acquired a majority stake in a Danish company, Hay. And on the surface, people might think like, well, why does that make sense? Well, to me, Meta and Rolf Hay are very Eamesian in their approach. They're big fans of Charles and Ray Eames, but also they've built this business that is design focused, cares about authored design, which Herman Miller has always cared about. We've always kind of collaborated with. So Natasha, a very long answer to your story, but I think these are proof points with our clients, with our customers, with the industry that we're the leaders. We kind of always have been. Here are the ways that we have been. And then also, if you have any sort of interior designer, architect, anyone who's ever had a history of design course, kind of allowing people to connect with these things in such a real, true way is super powerful. None of our competitors can really do the same. So it's a huge differentiator, which is what I try to share.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. I've got another quick question here from Lucy, which links in pretty much to the previous one that says, how much do our how much do our modern designers rely or use our archives?
So I try to be involved at the start of every new design collaboration. I try to put myself in the mix very early because I think designers, when they are briefed by Herman Miller, they know that there's a history. They're excited themselves. A chance to even just sort of get a tour through the archives is really powerful. But for example, we're about to launch a chair with Ilsa Crawford, and Ilsa came to Herman Miller, came to the archives, spent a lot of time doing primary source research, at least just for inspiration. So I try to get in as early as possible to let designers know that is even a resource that they can use, but also to get them thinking about how they're documenting their own process so that I can archive the stuff of today.
Fantastic. I got one here from Mark asking, do we add any new things? Do we add any modern things to the archives?
Totally. Like I said, I got a patent for the Cosm chair a few weeks ago. I have I'm arranging a donation right now to the Victoria and Albert Museum of Herman Miller has launched this live platform. We tried it out in the Aeron chair. It didn't really take, but we're donating that prototype of a live Aeron to the V&A, which will be included in the opening of their design exhibition once that happens. But yeah, so I'm constantly sort of acquiring new things and making sure that we are documenting our history now so that whoever has my job in 50 years can do what I'm doing now about people like Michael Anastasiades or the Hayes or Not One, or Studio 7.5. So all of the designers that are part of the Herman Miller group now are kind of part of my purview and making sure that we save and have the ability to tell these stories.
That's absolutely fantastic. I don't have any more questions for you, but thank you so much for that. That was really, really fascinating to watch. We had 146 people here online. I'll quickly add you guys a link to I think Mark just posted. There's a link to any more events if you guys want to join us. Mark just posted it, hminsightgroup.com/events. So if you want to join any one of our additional seminars coming up, feel free to click on it and get your free ticket. Thank you very much, Amy. If you can just stay on, just say goodbye to a few people, that would really be much appreciated. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and please come visit.
Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone.